The North Sea stretches endlessly under a pale, morning light, its waves rolling gently, whispering secrets carried from lands unseen. The air is crisp, filled with the subtle tang of salt and the quiet hum of wind moving through distant cliffs. Here, on this vast and lonely expanse, the story of the Viking explorers begins. A story woven not only from tales of conquest, but from journeys guided by curiosity, courage, and an intimate understanding of nature. It is a history both grand and quietly introspective, a history where the roar of the ocean meets the soft rhythm of human ambition. Vikings, often imagined only as fierce warriors and raiders, were far more complex. Their lives were a delicate balance of domestic calm and daring adventure. Within the longhouses, fires crackled softly, illuminating wooden walls etched with patterns and runes. Families shared quiet evenings, weaving, telling stories, and listening to the wind as it slid across the fjords. This contrast between the warmth and stillness of their homelands and the unknown expanses they would one day traverse creates the perfect tension, drawing us toward curiosity about what lay beyond the familiar shores. It is easy to picture these explorers preparing for a journey. The hushed creak of timber as longships rested on the beach, sails fluttering softly in the morning breeze. Each ship was a vessel of both survival and discovery, carefully constructed with a deep understanding of wind, wave, and weather. The longships themselves seem almost alive, their polished wood reflecting muted sunlight, ready to carry men across waters that few dared to challenge. In these early moments, we glimpse the harmony between human ingenuity and the often harsh, unpredictable forces of nature, a theme that will echo throughout the entire tale of Viking exploration. The mystery begins not with a map, nor with written instructions, but with the open horizon, a line where sea meets sky, fading into mist. For the Vikings, this was both a challenge and an invitation. The sea demanded respect, for it could turn from serene and glassy to turbulent and unforgiving without warning. Yet, it also offered freedom, a pathway to lands untouched, stories yet unimagined, and possibilities unbounded by the limitations of home. This delicate tension between the familiar and the unknown is what made the Viking voyages so compelling, not only in history, but as a narrative of human aspiration. As our journey unfolds, we are invited to imagine the sensation of standing on the deck of a longship, the cold spray of seawater against the skin, the soft groan of timber flexing beneath the weight of the crew, and the distant cry of seabirds circling above. Each element serves to lull the mind into quiet attentiveness, drawing the listener into a meditative state where the vastness of the ocean mirrors the expanse of imagination. In this calm, reflective space, history and mystery coexist, intertwining in ways that make the stories of the Vikings both informative and gently hypnotic. Even the tales of raids and battles, often highlighted in popular culture, fade into the background here, replaced by a slower rhythm. The careful observation of stars, the tracking of currents, and the silent understanding of weather patterns. The focus shifts from chaos to subtle mastery, from dramatic violence to serene ingenuity. It is in these quieter aspects of their lives that the true essence of Viking exploration emerges. The relentless pursuit of knowledge, the courage to venture into uncertainty, and the poetic beauty found in navigating worlds both known and unknown. In this introduction, the listener is not only provided with historical context, but is also gently prepared to follow the Vikings across oceans and into distant lands. The narrative encourages reflection on the contrasts that define human experience: safety versus risk, warmth versus cold, the known versus the mysterious. By allowing the imagination to wander through misty fjords, creaking ships, and uncharted seas, the audience is invited into a world where curiosity awakens softly, like the first light over the horizon. Thus, as the wind brushes over the North Sea and the waves lap quietly against the shore, we set sail into a history both real and dreamlike. We embark upon journeys that test the limits of human endurance and yet celebrate the delicate, almost meditative relationship between people and the vast, untamed world around them. It is a story that will unfold gradually, in measured rhythms and calm tones, guiding listeners gently from curiosity into wonder, from fact into the quiet embrace of mystery. The lands of Scandinavia, with their rugged mountains, dense forests, and deep fjords, shaped the people who would become known as Vikings. Life in these northern regions demanded resilience and a close connection to the natural world. Winters were long, nights stretched endlessly, and the wind carried both the scent of the sea and the chill of snow-covered plains. Within this environment, communities developed a rhythm of life that was both practical and contemplative, blending daily survival with an appreciation for the subtle beauty of the surrounding landscape. It was a life of contrasts: warmth inside the longhouses and cold outside, safety within community walls and danger beyond them, routine and adventure intertwined seamlessly. Vikings were not merely raiders, as popular images often suggest. They were farmers, craftsmen, traders, and storytellers. In the longhouses, fires glowed softly, casting flickering shadows on wooden beams and walls etched with runes. Families gathered to share meals of salted fish, barley porridge, and root vegetables, their conversations filled with stories passed down from generation to generation. Evenings were quiet and reflective, punctuated by the soft crackle of flames and the distant howl of wolves outside. These moments of domestic serenity reveal a side of Viking life that is rarely celebrated: the calm, structured existence that nurtured creativity, courage, and the skills required for survival and exploration. The architecture of their homes reflected this harmony between practicality and subtle artistry. Longhouses, though simple in design, were carefully constructed to withstand harsh winters and shifting landscapes. Smoke holes in the roofs allowed the quiet escape of fire's warmth, while the wooden walls insulated against biting winds. Each home was a sanctuary, providing not only shelter, but a connection to ancestors through carvings and symbols that adorned beams and doors. In these details, one can sense the same meticulous attention that would later be applied to the crafting of their longships, the precise planning of voyages, and the measured observation of a natural world. Children grew up immersed in this environment, learning early the skills needed to navigate both land and sea. They observed the patterns of the tides, the migration of birds, and the subtle changes in wind and sky. Storytelling was as much a lesson in survival as it was a source of wonder. Tales of heroes and explorers, of distant lands and mysterious seas, filled their imaginations while teaching respect for the forces of nature. Through these narratives, the next generation absorbed the courage and curiosity that would one day propel them across oceans, shaping the destiny of entire communities. Agriculture and craftsmanship were central to their way of life, providing sustenance and tools for both everyday living and the great journeys that lay ahead. They harvested barley, rye, and oats, and tended livestock that provided milk, meat, and wool. Skilled hands transformed wood, bone, and metal into practical implements and ornate objects alike. Axes, knives, and plows were crafted with precision, while jewelry and carved symbols expressed cultural identity and connection to the divine. Even in these ordinary activities, there existed a quiet mindfulness, an appreciation for the delicate balance between human effort and the natural cycles of the environment. The social structure of Viking communities reinforced this balance, emphasizing cooperation, respect, and shared responsibility. Elders were revered for their wisdom, guiding decisions about farming, navigation, and defense. Community gatherings provided both entertainment and counsel, blending storytelling, music, and ceremony into the fabric of daily life. This collective rhythm nurtured resilience, teaching individuals how to work together in both mundane and extraordinary circumstances. It was a foundation that would later sustain them as they ventured into unknown seas, facing challenges far greater than any found within the safety of their villages. Religion and spirituality were woven seamlessly into the fabric of existence. The Norse pantheon, with gods and goddesses embodying natural forces, served as both guide and metaphor. Rituals, sacrifices, and offerings maintained a connection with these divine presences, instilling a sense of order and purpose. Nature itself was revered. The forests, rivers, and mountains were not merely resources but companions and teachers. This reverence for the environment would echo in their navigational practices, where careful observation and respect for natural signs became essential to survival. Yet, despite the apparent tranquility of their homes, the Vikings were acutely aware of the dangers that lurked beyond. Winter storms could devastate crops, predators threatened livestock, and human conflicts occasionally erupted. This awareness of risk honed their skills and prepared them for the greater uncertainties of exploration. The lessons learned in childhood, in the rhythm of domestic life, and through observation of the natural world, laid the groundwork for the calm, measured courage necessary to confront the vast, open sea. Even in the simplest of moments, there existed poetry in their existence. The quiet sway of a fishing net, the slow rotation of a spinning wheel, or the soft patter of rain on a wooden roof could all be meditative experiences. These subtleties nurtured attentiveness and patience, qualities as essential to crafting a ship as they were to surviving a long winter. The Vikings' ability to find wonder in ordinary life, to balance labor with reflection, allowed them to carry serenity into their extraordinary adventures. By understanding the Viking way of life, we see the origins of their remarkable journeys. Their culture, shaped by both beauty and adversity, cultivated a population capable of contemplating the unknown with calm curiosity. It is within these quiet domestic rhythms, these small acts of mindfulness and care, that the spirit of exploration was born. They learned to navigate the delicate equilibrium between comfort and danger, home and horizon, preparation and risk, a balance that would guide them across vast oceans in pursuit of new lands. As we close this reflection on their daily lives, the listener is invited to imagine the flickering glow of a longhouse fire, the soft rustle of wind through the trees, and the murmured stories of ancestors carried from one generation to the next. The contrast between the warmth of home and the mysteries of the wider world is established here, setting the stage for the next chapter, the irresistible call of the unknown seas. It is this very call that transforms ordinary lives into legendary journeys, guiding Vikings from familiar fjords to distant, mist-shrouded horizons where history and mystery intertwine. Beyond the familiar fjords and forests of Scandinavia lay a vast, untamed world, beckoning with both promise and uncertainty. The Vikings, shaped by the rhythms of their homeland, felt a persistent pull toward the horizon, a quiet insistence that whispered through wind and wave. This was not a hurried ambition, nor a reckless pursuit of adventure. It was a contemplative curiosity, a recognition that beyond the known lay new lands, new experiences, and new stories waiting to be discovered. The sea became both a mirror and a mystery, reflecting their courage while concealing its hidden challenges beneath rippling surfaces. The call of the unknown seas was subtle, almost poetic. On misty mornings, when the fjords lay shrouded in fog and the forests seemed to hold their breath, one could almost hear the soft murmur of distant lands carried on the wind. Birds returning from long flights over open water hinted at islands unseen, while the movement of currents suggested paths untraveled. For the Viking mind, attuned to nature signs, these gentle signals were invitations. They promised discoveries that could transform lives, expand knowledge, and weave new threads into the fabric of their history. Preparation for these journeys was as much spiritual as practical. The Vikings honored their gods with quiet rituals before embarking, seeking blessings for safe passage and guidance through uncertainty. Offerings were made at the water's edge, small fires were lit, and prayers were whispered into the wind. These moments, deeply meditative in nature, reinforced the internal balance necessary for voyaging into the unknown. Every ship launched was a sacred act, a blending of human skill and divine protection, where courage was tempered by careful planning and curiosity danced alongside caution. As ships glided silently into the open waters, the familiar coasts gradually receded. The comforting patterns of home, the sound of livestock, the warm glow of longhouse fires, the murmur of community life, faded into memory. In their place arose the vast, rhythmic undulations of the ocean, a landscape of endless horizons and shifting moods. Calm seas could lull even the most experienced sailor into a contemplative state, while sudden storms reminded them of the sea's immense power. This contrast between serenity and unpredictability defined the essence of the Viking journey, where moments of peace were interwoven with episodes of challenge, and the unknown remained both alluring and humbling. The voyages often began with Iceland, a land of stark beauty and quiet isolation. Its fjords and volcanic plains offered both opportunity and challenge. The settlers who arrived there experienced days of muted sunlight in summer and long, shadowed nights in winter. Life required patience, observation, and adaptation. These early journeys taught the Vikings to read the subtle cues of the natural world, to recognize safe passages, anticipate storms, and locate resources hidden within a landscape. Every successful voyage reinforced their growing understanding of distant seas, preparing them for even greater expeditions into lands unknown. Greenland, further to the west, represented a more formidable challenge. Its icy coasts and unpredictable weather demanded extraordinary skill and fortitude. Yet, even amidst such harshness, there was an undeniable poetry in the landscape. Glaciers reflected muted light, fjords whispered with hidden currents, and the distant cry of seabirds punctuated the quiet vastness. Vikings approached these shores not as conquerors, but as observers and learners, attuned to the rhythm of the land and sea. Their experiences revealed a profound truth. Exploration was as much an internal journey as an external one, a practice of patience, attentiveness, and deep reflection. Along the way, they discovered islands and coastlines that remained unnamed in written records, places that exist only as footprints in the imagination. The absence of concrete knowledge adds to the allure, inviting listeners to drift into contemplation. Every mist-covered shore, every dark stretch of forest, every uncharted river delta becomes a canvas for the mind, painting visions of what might have been encountered. It is this interplay of fact and imagination, known and unknown, that gives the Viking voyages their hypnotic resonance, holding the audience in a gentle state of curiosity and wonder. The sea itself became a teacher, revealing lessons through its moods and patterns. Currents guided the ships along subtle paths, winds shaped their course, and the positions of sun and stars provided silent maps. These natural elements were not merely tools, but companions, offering both guidance and reflection. Navigating required more than physical skill. It demanded mental clarity and emotional calm. Each day at sea became an exercise in mindfulness, a continuous dialogue between human perception and the vast, ever-changing environment. Yet, the call of the unknown seas was not solely defined by landscapes and navigation. It was also carried through stories and sagas, whispered among communities before departure and sung around fires upon return. These narratives, often half myth and half fact, imbued the journeys with a sense of purpose and continuity. They reminded travelers of ancestors who had braved similar waters, of lessons learned and paths discovered. The past and future merged into a meditative present, where every stroke of the oar, every adjustment of the sail, and every cautious observation became part of a living, unfolding history. As the Vikings sailed further into the open Atlantic, the horizon became both an invitation and a mirror. It reflected the courage of those willing to venture beyond the familiar, while simultaneously concealing the true nature of lands ahead. It was in this balance, the tension between visibility and obscurity, certainty, and mystery that the journeys became timeless. Listeners are encouraged to imagine standing at the prow, wind in their hair, waves lapping softly against the hull, and the horizon stretching endlessly ahead. This gentle visualization fosters both relaxation and curiosity, drawing the mind into a calm yet inquisitive state. The Call of the Unknown Seas, ultimately, is the story of human desire to explore, to understand, and to connect with worlds beyond immediate perception. For the Vikings, this call was intertwined with the rhythms of life at home, the teachings of the natural world, and the quiet, meditative preparation that preceded each voyage. It was not an abrupt or violent urge, but a persistent, soft insistence, a whisper carried by wind and water, calling them into history and legend alike. In listening to this story, we too are invited to respond, to journey inward and outward simultaneously, contemplating the delicate interplay of courage, curiosity, and calm that defines every step into the unknown. Long before the Vikings embarked on journeys across vast and unpredictable seas, their voyages were made possible by a remarkable creation, the longship. These vessels were the culmination of centuries of observation, craftsmanship, and quiet ingenuity, designed not merely to survive the ocean, but to glide across it with elegance and efficiency. Each ship was a reflection of the Viking mind, practical, patient, and intimately attuned to the natural world. They embodied a delicate balance between strength and flexibility, speed and stability, art and utility. In imagining these ships, one can sense the same calm mindfulness that defined Viking life on land, extended now into the boundless expanse of the sea. Longships were slender and low, their hulls carved from overlapping planks fastened with iron rivets, creating a structure both resilient and graceful. The keel, a strong central spine, allowed the vessel to ride waves with minimal resistance, while the shallow draft enabled it to navigate both open ocean and narrow rivers. A single ship could carry dozens of men, along with supplies, animals, and treasures, yet it moved with a quiet fluidity, as if alive and aware of its surroundings. The craftsmanship reflected a patient observation of wood, wind, and water, where every curve and join contributed to the seamless integration of human skill and natural forces. The design of the longship was revolutionary for its time. Unlike heavier, bulkier vessels, it could travel quickly and quietly, relying on both oars and a square sail to harness wind and muscle in harmony. The oarsmen, seated in rhythmic unison, became part of the vessel itself, their movements synchronized with the gentle rocking of the waves. This created a meditative cadence, a low hum of life that echoed across the water, connecting sailors with both the ship and the sea. The longship was not just a tool. It was a companion, responding to subtle adjustments, carrying its crew toward horizons that seemed to shift with each sunrise. Decorative elements, subtle yet significant, adorned the longships. Carved dragon heads or serpentine figures often crowned the prow, their presence believed to protect the crew from malevolent spirits. Patterns etched along the gunnels reflected cultural identity and ancestral reverence. These designs were never ostentatious, but harmonized with the vessel's overall form, merging utility with quiet artistry. In their subtlety, they mirrored the Viking approach to life, functional yet mindful, practical yet imbued with symbolic meaning. The longship, in essence, was a floating embodiment of the Viking spirit. Beyond their physical design, the longships facilitated a profound psychological transition for the Vikings. Leaving the known shores behind, crew members relied on the ship as both sanctuary and guide. The gentle sway of the hull, the measured creak of wood under stress, and the rhythmic lapping of waves against the sides created a steadying presence in the face of uncertainty. Life aboard was simple yet structured, where shifts, navigation, observation, and maintenance combined into a quiet rhythm that offered reassurance. In this way, the longship was more than a vessel. It was a living framework that allowed humans to venture into realms of the unknown with confidence and composure. The sail, often woven from wool and sometimes reinforced with linen, caught the wind in a way that seemed almost magical. A single adjustment could change the trajectory, harnessing nature's force with precision. Skilled sailors read subtle shifts in wind direction and strength, moving the ship in tandem with currents, tides, and celestial guidance. Even storms, when approached with respect and observation, became opportunities for mastery and learning. In this, the Vikings demonstrated a philosophy that was at once practical and deeply meditative. The environment was not an adversary, but a partner in the journey. The longship also enabled intimate exploration of diverse environments. Shallow rivers could be navigated with ease, hidden coves approached silently, and remote islands reached without the constraints of heavy, cumbersome vessels. This versatility allowed Vikings to traverse not only open seas, but inland waterways, facilitating trade, communication, and the discovery of new territories. Each journey revealed the subtle beauty of landscapes previously unseen. Mist-shrouded fjords, forests mirrored in calm rivers, and beaches where sand and tide met in soft, shifting patterns. These quiet observations of the natural world became an inseparable part of the voyage, allowing both practical navigation and reflective appreciation. Moreover, the longship embodied a sense of continuity across generations. Skills in construction, navigation, and maintenance were passed down with patience, often in the form of hands-on apprenticeship and storytelling. Young men and women learned not only the mechanics of the vessel, but the philosophy behind it: attentiveness, patience, and respect for the ocean. Every plank, every rivet, and every stroke of the oar carried echoes of prior journeys, ancestral knowledge, and collective wisdom. In this, the longship became more than wood and sail. It became a repository of memory and a conduit for the legacy of exploration. The quiet power of the longship also shaped the Viking approach to risk and reward. Unlike modern vessels with engines and predictable systems, the longship required constant awareness and adaptability. Weather, tides, and currents dictated decisions, and human intuition played a central role. This created a delicate interplay between control and surrender, mastery and humility. Every voyage was a meditation on impermanence, teaching lessons in resilience, observation, and the acceptance of forces beyond one's control. The sea, in turn, became a mirror for human experience, vast, enigmatic, and capable of profound insight if approached with calm attentiveness. Finally, the longships enabled narratives that would echo through time. Each journey, whether to Iceland, Greenland, or the distant coasts of inland, was a story of quiet courage, careful observation, and deep connection to the world. The vessel itself carried more than men and cargo. It carried hope, curiosity, and the spirit of discovery. As listeners imagine these ships gliding across misty waters, they are invited to enter a state of reflection, visualizing the interplay of human skill, natural forces, and the subtle poetry of motion across the waves. The longship represents not only the tangible achievements of the Vikings, but the calm, enduring spirit that allowed them to explore the unknown with grace, patience, and insight. In understanding the longship, we grasp the essence of Viking exploration. It was not merely about reaching distant lands, but about harmony with the environment, mindfulness in motion, and the cultivation of courage tempered by observation. Each voyage began with preparation, each journey unfolded with rhythm, and each return carried stories of discovery, subtle lessons, and quiet triumphs. The longship, therefore, is both literal and symbolic, a bridge between home and horizon, past and future, the known and the mysterious, guiding both crew and listener into a reflective, immersive experience that resonates through time. The Vikings' mastery of the sea extended far beyond the elegance of their longships. Their true power lay in an extraordinary understanding of navigation, an art that combined observation, intuition, and patient study of the natural world. Unlike modern sailors with compasses and charts, the Vikings relied on subtle signs, patterns, and ancient knowledge passed down through generations. Each journey across the open waters was a dialogue between humans and the environment, a quiet negotiation guided by winds, currents, clouds, and stars. In this section, we explore the delicate, meditative craft of navigating without conventional instruments, revealing how the Vikings charted the unknown with a blend of logic and poetry. The first tool in this silent art was the sun. The Vikings understood the sun's movement across the sky, noting its changing angles and shadows to determine direction. Even on cloudy days, they observed the brightness of light filtering through the clouds and the color of the horizon, subtle cues that suggested the position of the sun and the orientation of the ship. Each observation required focus and attentiveness, training the eyes to detect minute differences in light and color. This approach reflects a rhythm that is almost meditative, where every glance becomes a moment of reflection, connecting human perception with the broader natural world. When the sun disappeared beneath a veil of fog or storm, the Vikings turned to the moon, stars, and even the behavior of birds. Sunstones, a legendary tool often cited in sagas, were crystals that could polarize light, revealing the sun's position even through thick cloud cover. Held at the correct angle, a sunstone would cast subtle shadows or changes in brightness, guiding the navigator in a quiet, almost mystical way. The procedure required patience, concentration, and repeated observation, an intimate engagement with both materials and nature. It was less a technology than a practice of mindfulness, allowing sailors to maintain calm, focus amid uncertainty. Birds played a surprising role in navigation. Seabirds, particularly gulls and other coastal species, were watched for signs of nearby land. Vikings observed their flight patterns at dawn and dusk, noting the direction and distance traveled. If birds appeared overhead in the morning, they often indicated land within reach. If they moved steadily offshore, the ocean stretched further still. This attentiveness to small signs cultivated a sensitivity to the environment that is almost poetic in its precision. Each bird observed was a whisper from the natural world, guiding the ship with quiet authority, teaching the crew to interpret meaning in subtle movement and sound. Currents and tides also informed the Viking understanding of the ocean. Experienced sailors read the color, speed, and temperature of water, sensing channels, hidden shoals, and changes in depth. They noted the shifting patterns of waves and ripples, which could indicate submerged rocks or the approach of coastline. Every observation was recorded mentally, a form of map-making that relied on memory and acute perception rather than paper and ink. Through this practice, the Vikings transformed the sea itself into a living chart, a space where observation and reflection created both safety and freedom. Oral maps and sagas preserve knowledge of routes, islands, and landmarks. Elders shared detailed accounts of previous voyages, describing the appearance of distant mountains, the shapes of river mouths, and the placement of harbors. These stories were memorized and recounted with precision, sometimes with the aid of simple carvings or marked stones. Navigational knowledge became a cultural treasure, blending fact with poetic storytelling. The repetition of these narratives in quiet moments aboard ship reinforced memory, guided action, and offered reassurance, providing a rhythm that steadied the mind even when the sea appeared infinite and directionless. The horizon itself became a guide. Vikings watched the colors of dawn and dusk, the appearance of clouds, and the reflection of sunlight on water to judge distance and orientation. Subtle changes in the sky or sea, slight shifts in light, the shape of waves, or the behavior of reflections, were interpreted with meticulous care. This required patience, observation, and calm focus, qualities that were cultivated over years of training and apprenticeship. In this practice, navigation was not a mechanical task, but a contemplative art, transforming uncertainty into a meditative awareness of the world. The challenges of navigating without instruments also demanded adaptability. Storms could obscure landmarks and obscure the sun for days, requiring both skill and composure. Vikings developed contingency strategies, noting secondary signs, relying on collective memory, and trusting experience to guide them. Decisions were made with quiet deliberation, weighing evidence from wind, water, sky, and instinct. In this, the journey itself became an exercise in mindfulness, where awareness and presence were as vital as courage and strength. This method of navigation fostered a deep sense of connection with the natural world. The sea, sky, and living creatures were not passive backdrops, but active participants in the journey. Every gust of wind, every ripple of current, and every distant cry of a bird was a communication, a subtle instruction, or a cautionary note. In listening carefully, the Vikings could traverse vast distances with remarkable precision, moving through spaces that appeared chaotic and limitless to the untrained eye. The skill transformed the unknown ocean into a dynamic, perceptible environment, allowing both calm and curiosity to coexist. The beauty of this practice lies in its quiet intimacy. It invites reflection on how humans can perceive and interpret the world without reliance on modern tools, revealing a poetry in observation, patience, and attention to detail. It is not merely a historical technique, but a contemplative exercise, allowing the mind to drift alongside the ship, noticing subtle cues, imagining distant coasts, and attuning to rhythms that persist beyond human measurement. Each voyage becomes both literal and metaphorical, a journey through space and through consciousness, where navigation is as much about inner orientation as it is about physical direction. As the Vikings sailed toward distant lands, guided by sun, stone, birds, and memory, they cultivated an intimate knowledge of the oceans that was both practical and profoundly poetic. Each journey required humility and respect, a recognition of the sea's vastness and unpredictability, yet also a celebration of human ingenuity and perception. The ability to traverse thousands of miles without modern instruments speaks not only to skill, but to a mindset rooted in attentiveness, reflection, and harmony with nature. Through this understanding of navigation, the Vikings transformed the unknown into a space of discovery and reflection. The horizon, once distant and enigmatic, became a stage for exploration, learning, and subtle mastery. Every observation, every small decision, and every quiet adjustment carried significance, creating a voyage that was as much a meditation as it was a conquest of distance. The interplay of fact and mystery, observation and imagination, guided them across waters that still inspire wonder today. In embracing this approach, the Vikings remind us of the beauty in attentive observation and the serenity found in harmonizing with the natural world. After mastering the art of navigation and building longships capable of both resilience and grace, the Vikings ventured beyond the known edges of Scandinavia, guided by the quiet call of distant horizons. Their journeys first led them to Iceland, a land of stark beauty and hidden challenges. Approaching the island, explorers saw jagged cliffs rising from the mist, volcanic peaks shrouded in clouds, and black sand beaches stretched along quiet bays. The landscape was both inviting and formidable, a place where the promise of new land was intertwined with the realities of isolation, harsh winters, and uncertain resources. In these early settlements, the Vikings found a delicate balance between human endeavor and the untamed wilderness that surrounded them. Life in Iceland required resilience and ingenuity. The first settlers cleared land for grazing, built shelters from stone and timber, and learned to farm in rocky soils. Crops were limited to barley, oats, and hardy vegetables, while livestock, sheep, goats, and cattle, provided sustenance, milk, and wool. Every aspect of daily life demanded attention, patience, and quiet observation. Even simple routines like tending animals or gathering firewood became opportunities to attune to the rhythm of the environment. Through these routines, settlers developed a profound sense of place, learning to read weather patterns, track animal movements, and anticipate the subtle shifts of the changing seasons. The social and cultural structures of Iceland mirrored those of the homelands the Vikings had left behind. Families lived in clustered settlements, creating communities that balanced cooperation with independence. Elders shared knowledge about survival, navigation, and agriculture, while rituals and storytelling maintained a connection to ancestry and the divine. Fires in longhouses flickered softly at night, illuminating faces intent on listening and learning. Sagas were recited, not only as entertainment, but as instruction, weaving lessons from the past into the practical wisdom required to thrive in a new and unfamiliar land. In this way, life in Iceland was both disciplined and poetic, a slow, reflective rhythm that allowed communities to endure despite environmental challenges. Greenland represented an even greater challenge, further west and more remote. Its icy fjords, glaciers, and unpredictable weather demanded exceptional skill, courage, and adaptability. Those who ventured there discovered a land where summers were brief and winters long and dark, where snow and ice dominated the horizon for much of the year. Yet in the harshness, there was also a striking beauty. The soft reflection of sunlight on glaciers, the distant cry of seabirds over frozen fjords, and the subtle sound of icebergs shifting in cold waters. Greenland tested every lesson the Vikings had learned in Scandinavia and Iceland, pushing them to apply their knowledge of navigation, survival, and community in new and extreme conditions. Settlements in Greenland were small and scattered, often near the coast where fishing and hunting could supplement the limited agriculture. Crops were difficult to grow, and livestock had to be carefully tended to survive. Daily life was structured, disciplined, and interwoven with moments of quiet reflection. Every day required careful planning, ensuring food stores were sufficient, monitoring weather conditions, and maintaining shelters against wind and snow. This attention to detail created a rhythm that was both meditative and practical, reinforcing resilience and fostering a deep, almost spiritual connection to the surrounding environment. Even in the midst of these challenges, there was room for wonder. The Vikings observed the aurora borealis, shimmering across the dark Arctic skies, a reminder of the sublime mysteries beyond human comprehension. They watched whales breach in distant fjords, witnessed the intricate patterns of ice along frozen coastlines, and marveled at the subtle changes in light and color across the vast landscape. These quiet moments of observation provided not only guidance for survival, but also a sense of poetic resonance, where beauty and practicality coexisted seamlessly. The land, though demanding, became a source of inspiration and reflection, shaping both the physical and inner journeys of those who settled there. Trade and communication were vital to survival in these remote regions. Settlers maintained connections with Iceland and Scandinavia, exchanging goods, knowledge, and news. Longships, carefully crafted for speed and reliability, carried travelers and supplies across treacherous waters. This exchange strengthened communities, providing reassurance that even in isolation, they remained part of a broader network of culture and commerce. These interactions, though limited in frequency, reinforced a sense of belonging and continuity, reminding settlers that they were not alone, even at the edge of the known world. Exploration of new shores also inspired the imagination. The Vikings named rivers, mountains, and islands, leaving a linguistic legacy that persists to this day. These names often reflected physical characteristics, legendary tales, or the emotions evoked by the landscape. By observing and labeling the environment, the settlers created a mental map that was both functional and poetic, bridging the known with the unknown. In doing so, they transformed remote lands into spaces that could be understood, navigated, and remembered, connecting human consciousness with the vast, untamed world. In both Iceland and Greenland, the Vikings' experiences highlight the interplay of challenge and serenity. The harsh conditions demanded resilience, discipline, and adaptation, yet the process of learning and observing brought moments of calm, reflection, and subtle joy. The quiet rhythm of life, tending animals, maintaining shelters, watching the sky, created a meditative cadence that mirrored the voyages themselves. Each day was both a practical endeavor and an opportunity for contemplation, fostering skills that would later be essential for even more distant journeys, such as those to Vinland. Ultimately, the settlements of Iceland and Greenland represent the transformative power of exploration. They were not merely stops along a route, but living laboratories where human ingenuity, observation, and courage converged. The Vikings learned to read landscapes, adapt to harsh environments, and cultivate both community and individual resilience. These lessons became foundational, preparing them to navigate and settle lands further west, in places yet shrouded in mist and legend. The act of inhabiting new shores was as much an inner journey as an external one, fostering patience, attentiveness, and a quiet reverence for the vast, mysterious world beyond the horizon. As we leave the rugged landscapes of Iceland and Greenland, the listener is invited to envision the fjords glimmering in muted sunlight, glaciers shifting silently in cold waters, and longhouses glowing softly against the night. The contrast between the harshness of the environment and the warmth of human endeavor echoes the broader Viking experience. Life defined by challenge and wonder, risk and reflection, the known and the unknown. These early settlements are the prelude to greater journeys, offering both practical knowledge and poetic insight that will guide explorers as they move further into uncharted seas and lands. Between voyages and settlements, the Vikings carried more than goods and tools. They carried stories. These tales, whispered from generation to generation, flowed like the wind across fjords and rivers, embedding the history of exploration into memory and imagination. Stories of distant lands, unseen creatures, and ancestors who had braved the seas formed a tapestry of culture, guiding both young and old in times of uncertainty. They were not merely entertainment. They were instruction, memory, and inspiration, allowing people to traverse both the physical and psychological landscapes of the unknown. Even in the quiet moments of daily life, these narratives found their place. Around the soft glow of fires and longhouses, elders recounted journeys to Iceland and Greenland, detailing the subtle observations that had ensured survival. Children listened with rapt attention, imagining glaciers shimmering under muted sunlight, waves lapping softly against the prow of a longship, and the distant cry of seabirds signaling land. These stories instilled a sense of continuity and purpose, reminding each listener that they were part of a larger rhythm, connected across time to those who had ventured before them. The wind itself became a carrier of narrative. In coastal villages, the sound of gusts passing through rigging or rustling through trees evoked memories of past journeys. Sailors remembered storms and calm seas, using the whispering wind as both reminder and guide. Even the faintest changes in air temperature or direction were interpreted with quiet attentiveness, offering insight into weather, currents, and a likelihood of nearby land. The natural world, in essence, became a living storyteller, reinforcing the lessons embedded in oral traditions. These tales often blurred the line between fact and myth, creating a gentle tension that both comforted and inspired. While some stories recorded precise routes and navigational strategies, others described encounters with giants, sea serpents, or lands shrouded in mist. This interplay of known and unknown, real and imagined, cultivated curiosity and wonder. Listeners were invited to inhabit a liminal space where practical knowledge coexisted with poetic reflection, where caution mingled with imagination, and where the horizon was both a destination and a mystery. The stories also served as quiet instruction in patience and observation. By recounting the careful attention given to currents, winds, and bird flight, elders taught the next generation how to perceive subtle cues from the environment. Each anecdote, though framed in narrative form, contained lessons in mindfulness, attentiveness, and harmony with nature. These principles were essential for survival, but they also cultivated a reflective mindset, preparing sailors and settlers alike to approach the vast and unpredictable world with calm curiosity. Moreover, the stories carried emotional resonance. They preserved moments of awe, fear, triumph, and sorrow, connecting listeners to the emotional experiences of those who had ventured first. Hearing about a storm that tested courage or a distant shore glimpsed through morning mist allowed listeners to feel the weight of the journey without leaving home. In this way, stories acted as bridges between past and present, home and horizon, memory and imagination. They fostered empathy and continuity, making the distant seas and remote landscapes feel intimately familiar. In essence, these narratives created a mental map, blending practical guidance with imaginative insight. As tales of Icelandic fjords or Greenlandic glaciers were repeated, the mind began to visualize distant lands, charting them with both precision and poetry. The wind, carrying these stories across villages and settlements, ensured that knowledge traveled as fluidly as the longships themselves. Through this process, every tale became a vessel, transporting wisdom, memory, and inspiration to new ears, readying the next generation for their own encounters with the unknown. Thus, the stories carried on the wind served as both pause and bridge in a larger journey of Viking exploration. They connected the lessons of home and settlement to the adventures yet to come, offering reflection, context, and quiet anticipation. In listening to these tales, we are invited to slow our breath, let imagination drift across uncharted waters, and attune ourselves to the rhythm of history unfolding in harmony with the natural world. The whisper of the wind, the echo of stories, and the subtle tension between the known and unknown guide us gently forward, preparing both mind and spirit for the next leg of the journey. Beyond Iceland and Greenland, the horizon stretched endlessly, revealing lands few had seen or even imagined. Vinland, a name whispered in sagas and etched into the collective memory of the Viking world, represented both hope and mystery, a place where the familiar rhythms of home would meet the unpredictable pulse of a new continent. The journeys to these distant shores were not abrupt or reckless. They were carefully orchestrated endeavors, guided by knowledge accumulated over generations and the quiet patience born from experience with northern waters. Each voyage was a delicate balance between courage and caution, exploration and reflection, fact and the gentle lure of legend. As the longships approached Vinland, the coastline emerged from mist like a half-formed dream. Rolling hills met dense forests, and rivers traced soft silver lines across the land. The beaches, often blanketed in pale sand or smooth pebbles, were untouched by human habitation. Wolves and birds roamed freely, while the forest canopy shifted in subtle, dappled light. For the Vikings, this landscape was both invitation and challenge. It promised fertile lands and abundant resources, yet demanded observation, patience, and respect. Every decision, where to land, which paths to follow, how to interact with the environment, was guided by quiet attentiveness, a calm mindfulness that mirrored their approach to life and navigation. Settlers in Vinland faced unfamiliar climates and unfamiliar flora. The soil differed from that of Greenland or Iceland, requiring new methods of cultivation and experimentation with crops. Timber was abundant, offering opportunities for building shelters and crafting tools, yet it also required careful management to prevent accidents or structural failure. The rivers teemed with fish, and forests provided game and medicinal plants. But these resources had to be approached with knowledge and caution. In all things, observation and patience were paramount, turning every task into an exercise in learning and reflection. Interactions with the land extended beyond the practical. The Vikings noted seasonal patterns, animal behavior, and subtle environmental cues, translating them into understanding and guidance. Migration patterns of birds signaled approaching weather changes. The flow of rivers indicated fertile grounds and potential obstacles. Even the color of foliage, the density of underbrush, and the scent of the air were observed for clues about soil quality, water sources, and suitable locations for temporary or permanent settlement. In this way, exploration became a quiet, meditative dialogue with the natural world, where observation and intuition were as vital as physical skill. Vinland also held encounters with people unfamiliar to the Vikings. The sagas speak of cautious interactions with indigenous inhabitants, observed from a distance at first, then approached with measured curiosity. These meetings were often quiet, tense, and filled with subtle negotiation. Communication relied on gestures, observation, and careful listening, creating moments where patience and attentiveness became essential. Such encounters reinforced the Vikings' understanding that exploration was not merely a conquest of land, but a study of the broader human and ecological environment, a lesson in humility, awareness, and respect. The environment itself shaped daily life in Vinland. Shelters were constructed with careful attention to prevailing winds and seasonal changes. Fireplaces were positioned to provide warmth while minimizing smoke accumulation, and food was stored in ways that preserved freshness without constant attention. Life unfolded in a rhythm dictated by natural cycles. Dawns brought activity, midsummer days demanded labor and observation, and nights offered reflection beside quiet fires. Even moments of rest carried lessons, as settlers listened to the subtle sounds of forest and river, internalizing the nuances of a new world that was both beautiful and demanding. Longships remained crucial in Vinland, not only for initial arrival, but for ongoing exploration and communication. Coastal and river travel allowed Vikings to chart territory, identify safe harbors, and assess the abundance of resources. These journeys were slower and quieter than the open ocean passages, emphasizing observation over speed. Each trip along the coast or upriver was a meditation, teaching settlers how to move through unfamiliar environments with both efficiency and respect. The longship, once again, served as both tool and companion, guiding human effort with gentle responsiveness to wind, current, and water conditions. The subtleties of Vinland's landscape also inspired reflection and imagination. Mist-covered mornings, where rivers glimmered like silver ribbons, encouraged contemplation. Soft rustles in the underbrush invited careful study. Distant mountains mirrored in still water fostered quiet wonder. These experiences were not merely aesthetic. They informed practical decisions about settlement, hunting, and agriculture. They also reinforced the meditative rhythm of exploration, where mindfulness and attentiveness were as essential as courage or technical skill. In this, Vinland became a living classroom, blending discovery, reflection, and poetic insight. Even as settlements were established, the Vikings remained aware of the limits of their knowledge. The land was vast, resources finite, and human interactions unpredictable. Caution was never abandoned. Curiosity was tempered by careful observation. This balance between wonder and wisdom, between risk and reflection, defined the Viking approach to Vinland and other distant shores. Each day, each journey, each observation strengthened understanding while preserving a sense of mystery, creating a dynamic interplay between the known and unknown. The stories of Vinland traveled back to Iceland and Greenland, carried on the wind like whispers of distant possibilities. Elders and sailors recounted what they had seen, noting subtle details of terrain, resources, and climate, while blending these observations with the poetry of lived experience. These narratives allowed future generations to imagine the distant continent without witnessing it directly, cultivating curiosity, anticipation, and a quiet respect for the unknown. The sagas and oral histories served as both map and meditation, connecting faraway lands to home, memory to imagination, and fact to gentle myth. In this way, Vinland represents more than a historical footnote. It embodies the spirit of Viking exploration. It is a place where courage meets observation, where curiosity is tempered by mindfulness, and where the unknown is approached not with haste, but with reverent attentiveness. By imagining the quiet forests, flowing rivers, and untamed coastlines, listeners are invited to step into a reflective space, contemplating the balance of human effort and natural rhythm. Vinland, distant and mysterious, becomes a canvas for both understanding and imagination, a landscape that bridges history, poetry, and the enduring allure of exploration. Life on distant shores like Vinland was a delicate balance of opportunity and challenge. While fertile lands, abundant rivers, and dense forests promised sustenance, the Vikings quickly learned that survival demanded careful observation, planning, and flexibility. Every decision, from choosing where to build shelters to determining the safest routes through the woods, required attention to subtle cues in the environment. The rhythm of daily life became a continuous dialogue with the land, a quiet meditation in which humans adapted to the natural world rather than attempting to dominate it. One of the most pressing challenges was the climate. Vinland's weather could shift unexpectedly, moving from calm, sunny days to sudden storms with biting winds and heavy rainfall. Settlers learned to read the sky, observing cloud formations, wind direction, and the behavior of birds and animals to anticipate changes. They constructed shelters that offered warmth and protection, using timber and stone to withstand harsh conditions. Even small details, such as positioning the entrance to shield against prevailing winds or elevating storage areas to avoid water damage, reflected careful consideration, patience, and intimate understanding of the landscape. Food sources were equally critical. While the land offered fertile soil for crops and forests teemed with game, success was never guaranteed. Crops like barley, rye, and hardy vegetables required constant attention, particularly in unfamiliar soils with different drainage and mineral content. Livestock needed careful grazing management, and hunting demanded knowledge of animal patterns and seasonal behaviors. Fishing, a familiar skill from their homeland, became a central part of subsistence, but rivers in Vinland were often unpredictable. Each meal depended on attentiveness, planning, and the ability to adapt to subtle shifts in the environment. Adaptation extended beyond food and shelter. The Vikings had to adjust their routines, timing daily activities according to seasonal daylight and weather. In summer, long hours allowed for extended work and exploration, while winter's brief light required careful prioritization of tasks. Clothing and gear had to accommodate fluctuating temperatures, and even simple tools needed to be adapted to the new landscape. In this way, the settlers cultivated resilience, not as a response to occasional adversity, but as a continuous, meditative practice embedded in every action. Disease and injury posed additional challenges. Isolation meant that medical knowledge and remedies had to be improvised, often relying on natural resources. Herbs, roots, and plants were carefully studied for their healing properties, and minor injuries were treated with a mix of practical skill and observation. This interplay of trial, error, and reflection emphasized the Vikings' holistic approach to survival. Every obstacle became a lesson in attentiveness, patience, and respect for the environment. The land demanded humility, and those who thrived were those who observed closely and responded thoughtfully. The social dimension of survival was equally vital. Communities relied on cooperation, shared labor, and collective decision-making. Elders provided guidance, mediating disputes, and sharing knowledge of seasonal patterns, safe travel routes, and hidden resources. Children participated in chores, learning through observation and repetition the skills needed to sustain life. These networks of care and knowledge ensured that survival was not an individual effort but a shared endeavor, cultivating a sense of continuity, belonging, and quiet reflection even in the face of uncertainty. Exploration of the surrounding environment was an ongoing necessity. Settlers moved beyond initial camps to map rivers, forests, and coastlines, creating mental and oral maps that guided future expeditions. Each journey required careful observation, noting the shapes of river bends, the types of vegetation, and the behavior of animals. Mistakes were often costly, reinforcing the need for mindfulness and patience. Yet even in moments of difficulty, there was beauty, the soft rustle of leaves, the muted reflection of clouds on rivers, the gentle cry of distant birds, reminding settlers of the subtle poetry of life and their place within the greater rhythm of the land. Interactions with indigenous peoples introduced another layer of complexity. Communication was careful, cautious, and respectful, requiring observation, listening, and adaptation. These encounters were opportunities to learn, exchange knowledge, and understand new ways of life, while simultaneously navigating differences in culture, expectation, and intention. Patience and reflection became essential tools, as settlers balanced curiosity with caution, understanding that human interactions could be as unpredictable and nuanced as the natural environment. Adaptation also required psychological resilience. Isolation, uncertainty, and the constant demands of survival could weigh heavily on the mind. The Vikings relied on stories, ritual, and community gatherings to maintain emotional balance. Firesides became spaces for reflection and connection, where tales of distant lands and past journeys were shared, calming anxiety and inspiring hope. In these quiet moments, settlers integrated experience and imagination, cultivating a mindset that allowed them to approach challenges with both attentiveness and serenity. Ultimately, the Vikings' ability to survive and adapt in Vinland and other distant lands reflected a harmony between human ingenuity and natural observation. Every task, from planting crops to interpreting the flight of birds, required awareness, patience, and careful decision-making. Challenges were not merely obstacles. They were invitations to learn, reflect, and refine skills. Survival became an ongoing meditation, where practical knowledge, emotional resilience, and attentiveness to subtle environmental cues merged into a coherent rhythm of life. Through this process, settlers developed a profound understanding of their environment. They learned to move quietly through forests, follow animal tracks, anticipate weather patterns, and harmonize daily routines with the cycles of nature. This balance between action and reflection, effort and observation, represents the essence of the Viking experience in new lands. A gentle negotiation with the unknown, where survival depended on humility, patience, and the cultivation of quiet awareness. In reflecting on these challenges, listeners are invited to imagine the quiet diligence of daily life, tending fields under muted sunlight, tracking game through soft forest underbrush, listening to rivers as they twist and flow, and observing subtle shifts in the wind. The contrast between difficulty and beauty, risk and attentiveness, hardship and discovery, creates a rhythm that is both soothing and thought-provoking. It is within this rhythm that the Vikings' enduring legacy of adaptation, mindfulness, and exploration becomes visible, preparing the mind for the stories yet to unfold in their far-reaching journeys. Even as the Vikings settled new lands and navigated distant shores, they never existed in complete isolation. Trade and contact served as subtle bridges between worlds, connecting remote settlements with distant communities across seas and rivers. Longships carried more than explorers and settlers. They carried goods, ideas, and stories, weaving together a network of human connection that spanned vast distances. Each journey across water reinforced not only survival, but cultural continuity, allowing settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland to remain part of a broader tapestry of exchange, learning, and quiet reflection. Trade often began with necessities. Food, timber, furs, and tools were exchanged between settlements, ensuring that resources were distributed and needs met despite distance. These exchanges required careful planning and attentiveness, as timing, weather, and navigation all influenced the success of each voyage. The act of trade became a meditation in itself. Patience was cultivated while waiting for favorable winds, observation sharpened to read subtle changes in the sea, and relationships were nurtured through repeated, respectful interactions. Even the simplest exchanges carried a rhythm of calm deliberation and gentle strategy. Beyond practical needs, trade facilitated cultural and intellectual exchange. Artifacts, ornamental objects, and even written symbols moved between communities, carrying subtle messages about values, beliefs, and identity. The Vikings absorbed knowledge about distant lands, including agricultural practices, navigational techniques, and survival strategies, integrating these lessons into daily life. These interactions allowed isolated settlements to expand their understanding of the world, transforming distant and unfamiliar places into spaces that could be observed, learned from, and appreciated. The gentle spread of ideas mirrored the quiet movement of ships over water, deliberate, measured, and connected to the natural rhythm of travel. Contact with distant communities also required diplomacy and reflection. Encounters could be cautious or ceremonial, always involving careful observation of social cues, customs, and local hierarchies. These interactions demanded humility, patience, and adaptability, as success depended not on force, but on subtle negotiation and understanding. By navigating the complexities of human relationships, the Vikings developed social skills as crucial as their knowledge of currents, winds, and landscapes. Each interaction was a lesson in attentiveness, reminding travelers that the unknown was not confined to geography alone, but included the intricate networks of human behavior and culture. The movement of goods and knowledge was complemented by the flow of stories. Tales of distant shores, new discoveries, and unusual encounters traveled alongside trade goods, carried by sailors and settlers across oceans and rivers. These narratives reinforced cultural memory, preserved practical wisdom, and inspired imagination. Through stories, remote lands like Vinland became familiar in the mind, mapped not just by geography but by narrative detail. This interplay of tangible exchange and intangible knowledge strengthened both survival and curiosity, creating a quiet continuity that bridged time and distance. Trade and contact also created opportunities for reflection. As settlers observed foreign customs, landscapes, and resources, they were reminded of the contrast between the familiar and the unknown. The act of witnessing difference encouraged attentiveness and subtle analysis, while maintaining respect for local environments and people. Such observations were recorded mentally, shared orally, and integrated into future strategies for travel, settlement, and exploration. This calm, attentive process created a rhythm of learning that mirrored the meditative qualities of navigation and settlement, emphasizing observation over haste and understanding over domination. In essence, the Vikings' bridges between worlds were as much conceptual as physical. Ships, trade, and stories connected communities across distances that might otherwise have seemed insurmountable. These networks fostered continuity, allowing knowledge, culture, and wisdom to flow quietly alongside material goods. Every exchange became an opportunity to observe, reflect, and integrate, reinforcing the core principles that guided exploration: patience, attentiveness, and a harmonious relationship with both the natural and human worlds. For listeners, this chapter serves as a gentle reminder that even in vast and remote landscapes, connections are possible. Longships gliding across calm seas, goods carefully exchanged, and stories shared around fires illustrate the enduring human impulse to reach out, communicate, and learn. The bridges built by the Vikings between lands, people, and ideas are quiet yet profound, echoing across centuries and inviting contemplation on the subtle ways in which we navigate our own networks of connection.
Among the Vikings, stories were more than entertainment. They were living vessels of memory, wisdom, and identity. Legends and sagas carried the experiences of ancestors across generations, connecting distant lands, unknown shores, and daring voyages into a continuous thread of cultural consciousness. Each tale, spoken softly around the flickering light of a longhouse fire or recited aboard a longship, transformed ordinary events into reflections of courage, survival, and subtle insight. These narratives preserved knowledge of navigation, survival, diplomacy, and adaptation, but they also contained the quiet poetry of lived experience, reminding listeners that exploration was as much a journey of the mind and spirit as it was of the body. Sagas often combined fact with the lyrical and the mystical. Accounts of voyages to Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland were recounted alongside encounters with strange creatures, mysterious lights, or legendary figures. While some stories documented precise routes, weather patterns, or the behavior of wildlife, others celebrated imagination, allegory, and moral lessons. This blending of the known and unknown created a rich tapestry of reflection and curiosity. Listeners learned to discern practical lessons while being gently encouraged to explore the mysteries beyond observation, embracing uncertainty as part of the journey. The oral tradition of storytelling cultivated attentive listening. Young men and women learned not only the content of the sagas but the rhythm, pauses, and nuances of delivery. Stories were recited slowly, deliberately, with emphasis on the interplay between action and observation, tension and resolution. These moments encouraged quiet reflection, allowing listeners to imagine distant lands, understand complex human interactions, and internalize lessons about patience, foresight, and resilience. Through repetition, memory, and attentive engagement, the narratives became internal maps, guiding both imagination and practical decision-making. Sagas also served as moral and practical guides. Tales of explorers who successfully navigated storms, survived harsh winters, or negotiated with foreign communities illustrated the principles of patience, observation, and adaptability. Conversely, stories of those who acted recklessly, ignored subtle signs, or failed to heed advice offered cautionary lessons. This subtle contrast of light and shadow reinforced understanding. Knowledge was valuable, observation was essential, and humility before the unknown was necessary. The sagas, therefore, functioned as living instruction manuals, embedded within poetry and narrative, ensuring that each generation learned from the experiences of the past. Memory was intertwined with place. Each story referenced specific landscapes, rivers, mountains, or islands, allowing listeners to mentally map both familiar and distant locations. When recounted aboard ships or within settlements, these descriptions evoked vivid imagery: glacier reflecting muted sunlight, fjords winding silently through hills, or forests stretching in quiet, undisturbed expanse. Such details fostered attentiveness to the environment, strengthening both practical knowledge and imaginative engagement. Through these stories, distant lands became accessible, navigable in the mind even if they remained physically out of reach. Legends and sagas also preserved emotional experience. Accounts of triumph, fear, joy, and loss were woven into the narrative, connecting listeners to the psychological and emotional dimensions of exploration. Moments of tension, such as navigating a storm or confronting unknown peoples, were paired with reflection, resourcefulness, and quiet courage. The sagas allowed listeners to inhabit these experiences vicariously, cultivating empathy and emotional resilience while maintaining a meditative awareness of the broader rhythms of life. Each tale was a mirror, reflecting both the external and internal landscapes of human experience. In addition to their instructive and emotional value, the sagas were a vehicle for cultural continuity. Names of ancestors, places, and significant events were carefully preserved, ensuring that history remained connected across generations. These stories created a sense of belonging, reminding listeners that they were part of a lineage that extended across seas, forests, and mountains. Even in isolation or amidst the harsh realities of new settlements, the recitation of sagas offered comfort, perspective, and a quiet anchor to shared heritage. The practice of storytelling was itself meditative. Reciters attuned their voice to the cadence of the narrative, pausing to allow imagery and lessons to settle in the mind. Listeners followed this rhythm, letting their thoughts drift gently across imagined landscapes, contemplating decisions, risks, and discoveries. In this way, the act of storytelling was not just about transmission of information. It was a slow, immersive process that fostered reflection, calm, and curiosity. The mind was guided on a journey almost parallel to the physical voyages themselves, moving through temporal and spatial landscapes with quiet attentiveness. Sagas also encouraged innovation and adaptation. Observing the successes and failures of ancestors inspired creative problem-solving, experimentation with new strategies, and careful assessment of risk. They reinforced the principle that attentive observation and thoughtful action were inseparable, encouraging settlers and voyagers to harmonize skill with mindfulness. By internalizing these narratives, listeners were subtly trained to navigate both tangible challenges and the uncertainties inherent in exploration. Ultimately, the legends and sagas of the Vikings form a bridge between past and present, between human experience and imagination. They allow us to perceive the interplay of courage, observation, patience, and reflection that defined exploration. As we listen to these narratives, we are invited to imagine the silent glacier of Greenland, the mist-covered rivers of Vinland, and the gentle sway of longships across open seas. We inhabit the minds and hearts of those who ventured beyond known horizons, embracing both the practical lessons and the quiet poetry of their journeys. Through the lens of sagas, exploration becomes more than a physical act. It transforms into a meditation on human experience, where observation, reflection, and creativity are as vital as courage and endurance. Legends remind us that memory, storytelling, and shared narrative carry wisdom across time, shaping understanding, guiding action, and nurturing a quiet curiosity that persists even centuries later. The sagas endure, like gentle waves across distant shores, inviting us to drift, imagine, and reflect upon the mysteries of the world and the journeys that shape us. Though the Viking settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland were eventually abandoned or diminished, the ripples of their journeys endured, subtly shaping the course of exploration for centuries to come. Their legacy is not found in grand monuments or widespread colonies, but in the quiet lessons embedded in their methods, observations, and stories. The Vikings demonstrated that courage, attentiveness, and reflection could guide humans across vast and unknown landscapes, and these principles quietly informed the navigators, cartographers, and explorers who followed. Even long after the ships returned to northern waters or rotted in coastal bays, the lessons of observation, adaptation, and curiosity remained embedded in cultural memory. The techniques developed by the Vikings, attunement to winds, currents, stars, and natural indicators, provided a foundation for the navigational skills that would later be essential in the age of discovery. While compasses, maps, and charts eventually became central tools for European explorers, the principles of observation and reflection pioneered by the Vikings endured. Mariners learned, often unknowingly, to observe subtle signs from the environment, patterns of bird flight, cloud formations, color of waves, and other indicators of nearby land. The Vikings' quiet, meditative approach to navigation fostered a mindset of attentiveness that became invaluable in exploring unknown oceans, emphasizing patience over haste and understanding over reckless ambition. Beyond technical skills, the Vikings' experience with settlement and adaptation offered indirect guidance to later explorers. Their careful observation of climate, terrain, and natural resources underscored the importance of harmonizing with the environment rather than attempting to impose control over it. Lessons from Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland revealed the necessity of planning, patience, and resilience in the face of adversity. These insights, preserved through sagas, oral histories, and the slow transmission of cultural memory, subtly influenced the approach of explorers who would later traverse the Atlantic, negotiate with indigenous peoples, and establish settlements in distant lands. The Vikings' legacy also resides in the poetic and imaginative aspects of their exploration. Their sagas, rich in observation and reflection, inspired curiosity about distant lands long before detailed maps existed. The descriptions of glacier, forests, rivers, and mist-shrouded shores provided mental landscapes for generations to contemplate and imagine. Later explorers carried this sense of wonder and possibility, understanding that exploration was not solely a physical act, but a journey of the mind and spirit as well. By intertwining practical knowledge with narrative imagination, the Vikings offered a template for exploration that embraced both reason and reflection. Cultural memory of the Vikings' travels persisted through Europe in subtle ways. References to northern lands, unusual customs, and distant shores occasionally appeared in maps, chronicles, and trading accounts, reminding scholars and sailors alike of regions that were both real and partially legendary. These faint echoes reinforced the idea that the known world had edges that could be tested, crossed, and understood, encouraging a mindset that valued observation, cautious experimentation, and respect for the unknown. In essence, the Viking journeys extended beyond the North Atlantic not just physically, but through memory and influence, quietly shaping the intellectual and exploratory climate of subsequent generations. Even the concept of long-distance maritime trade owes something to the Vikings. Their networks of exchange, connecting distant settlements through material goods, stories, and culture, created templates for understanding the interconnectedness of lands and peoples. Later explorers and merchants could look, consciously or unconsciously, to these models, appreciating the importance of maintaining contact, exchanging knowledge, and navigating both environmental and social landscapes with care. The Vikings demonstrated that exploration was not only about reaching new lands, but about sustaining connection and continuity across vast spaces, a principle that would prove essential in global navigation centuries later. The legacy of attentiveness and adaptation also extends to the human experience of exploration. The Vikings exemplified a contemplative approach, where survival, observation, and reflection were interwoven into a rhythmic practice. Later explorers often faced similar challenges: unpredictable climates, isolation, and unfamiliar lands. The quiet mindset cultivated by the Vikings, emphasizing patience, sensitivity to natural cues, and reflection on experience, offered a timeless template for approaching uncertainty. By observing, adapting, and internalizing lessons from the environment, humans could navigate the unknown with both effectiveness and a sense of calm curiosity. Stories of the Vikings' distant voyages, particularly to Vinland, also encouraged imagination and aspiration. Even as settlements faded, the mental maps created through sagas persisted, offering hints of lands across the ocean. The idea that the Atlantic could be crossed, that distant continents could be reached, lingered in collective memory, inspiring future navigators to contemplate journeys that would otherwise have seemed impossible. Through this subtle transmission of knowledge, myth, and observation, the Vikings contributed to the enduring human desire to explore, to bridge worlds, and to seek understanding beyond familiar horizons. In reflecting on their quiet legacy, it becomes clear that influence is not always immediate or visible. The Vikings may not have directly trained future explorers, nor left fully mapped continents for others to claim, yet their approach, rooted in attentiveness, adaptation, and reflective courage, permeated the ethos of exploration for centuries. By blending practical skills, careful observation, and imaginative narrative, they offered a model for human engagement with the unknown that balanced risk with mindfulness, curiosity with respect, and effort with reflection. As we consider this legacy, the listener is invited to imagine longships gliding across quiet seas, settlements nestled along distant coasts, and sagas recited under muted sunlight or firelight. The echoes of these journeys resonate subtly across time, whispering lessons about patience, observation, resilience, and reflection. The Vikings' influence is less about immediate conquest and more about shaping the human mind to approach uncertainty with curiosity and grace, leaving behind a blueprint for thoughtful, measured exploration that continues to inspire even centuries later. Even after centuries, the journeys of the Vikings leave a whisper of mystery, a sense of the unknown that continues to capture the imagination. Archaeological evidence, sagas, and historical records provide glimpses of their ventures, but vast stretches of detail remain elusive. Who exactly settled Vinland, and for how long? What encounters took place with indigenous peoples, and what knowledge was exchanged? How did the Vikings truly navigate these remote waters, and what prompted their eventual withdrawal from these distant lands? These questions linger like the soft mist over a fjord, inviting reflection, curiosity, and gentle speculation rather than immediate answers. Part of the mystery lies in the fleeting nature of Viking settlements. Unlike the monumental cities of other civilizations, their communities were modest, constructed from timber, stone, and earth, blending harmoniously with the landscape. Over time, weather, erosion, and decay have erased many traces, leaving only subtle impressions in the soil or the occasional artifact buried beneath layers of earth. This impermanence transforms the past into a puzzle, one that can be approached through careful observation, imagination, and inference, echoing the methods the Vikings themselves used when navigating and understanding unfamiliar lands. Vinland, in particular, remains a locus of speculation. While archaeological sites such as Elant's Auxiliary Meadows in Newfoundland provide compelling evidence of temporary Viking presence, many details of daily life, interactions, and geographic reach remain uncertain. How far did explorers venture inland? Which resources sustained them during long winters or in times of scarcity? What strategies did they employ to manage relationships with the indigenous peoples they encountered? The gaps in knowledge create a space for contemplation, allowing us to reflect on the delicate balance between human endeavor and environmental forces, and the limits of what can be preserved across time. The sagas themselves, while invaluable, add layers of ambiguity. Passed down orally for generations before being written, these stories blend observation, imagination, and poetic interpretation. They document voyages, encounters, and discoveries, but they also include legendary creatures, divine interventions, and symbolic events. This intertwining of fact and fiction challenges modern understanding while offering a unique lens into the Viking worldview. The sagas encourage listeners to inhabit a liminal space, where the known and the unknown coexist, and where curiosity and reflection become as important as certainty. Natural landscapes contribute to the enigmatic quality of Viking exploration. Harsh winters, shifting coastlines, dense forests, and hidden waterways all obscured the traces of human activity. Glacial movements in Greenland and Newfoundland altered landscapes over centuries, erasing paths and settlements. Rivers changed course, forests reclaimed open fields, and storms reshaped coastlines. These changes underscore the transient nature of human presence and remind us that much of history remains veiled, waiting for careful observation and interpretation to reveal its secrets. Human interactions further complicate the historical record. The nature and extent of contact between Vikings and indigenous peoples are not fully understood. Evidence suggests trade, exchange, and possibly conflict, but specifics are scarce. Without written documentation from all parties involved, much remains open to interpretation. This uncertainty invites a contemplative approach, prompting reflection on the subtleties of cultural encounter and the ways in which memory, observation, and storytelling preserve, distort, or illuminate history. The technological and navigational ingenuity of the Vikings also remains partially mysterious. Longships, designed for speed, durability, and versatility, carried explorers across treacherous seas, but many details of their construction, navigation methods, and seamanship are inferred from sagas, tools, and ship remnants. How did they interpret the sun, stars, and ocean currents with such precision? Which techniques have been lost to time, and which were adapted and refined by subsequent generations? Each unanswered question highlights the blend of skill, observation, and intuition that characterized Viking exploration, and encourages us to appreciate the subtle mastery required to traverse unknown waters. Even the reasons for their eventual withdrawal from distant settlements remain open to reflection. Was it climate change, resource scarcity, conflict, or a strategic decision to focus elsewhere? The answers are not definitive, leaving space for quiet speculation and meditation. This ambiguity mirrors the experience of the Vikings themselves, who navigated environments filled with uncertainty, relying on observation, patience, and reflection to make decisions. By contemplating these mysteries, modern listeners can connect with the rhythms and challenges of exploration, experiencing the subtle tension between discovery and limitation. The enduring allure of these unanswered questions lies in their ability to evoke imagination and reflection. They invite listeners to picture mist-covered coastlines, longships gliding silently over waves, dense forests stretching inland, and fires glowing softly in longhouses. The gaps in historical certainty allow the mind to wander, bridging fact and speculation, memory and imagination. This space between the known and unknown fosters a calm curiosity, encouraging a contemplative engagement with history rather than a rush to resolution. Ultimately, the mysteries left behind by the Vikings serve as a gentle reminder of the vastness of the world and the limits of human understanding. They inspire reflection on the courage, ingenuity, and patience required to venture beyond the familiar. By embracing the unknown, we honor the spirit of exploration that propelled the Vikings across oceans and through uncharted lands. In this quiet contemplation, history becomes more than a series of events. It transforms into a living, meditative experience, where every unanswered question carries the soft invitation to imagine, wonder, and listen. The listener is encouraged to drift alongside these mysteries, sensing the rhythm of the waves, the whisper of the wind across distant shores, and the soft, enduring legacy of explorers whose journeys were defined as much by observation and reflection as by physical presence. In leaving questions unanswered, history preserves the tension between curiosity and comprehension, allowing us to connect with the essence of exploration, a slow, thoughtful engagement with the unknown, unfolding in harmony with the natural and human world.
The journeys of the Vikings invite quiet contemplation of a timeless quality inherent in the human spirit, the desire to explore, to seek, and to understand. Across icy fjords, dense forests, and distant continents, they moved with patience, attentiveness, and reflection. Each voyage, whether across open seas or along meandering rivers, was guided not only by skill and courage, but by a meditative awareness of their surroundings. Observation, subtle intuition, and respect for the natural world formed the rhythm of exploration, reminding us that discovery is as much an inward journey as it is a traversal of the physical world. Exploration, in this sense, is a dialogue between the known and the unknown, The Vikings ventured into lands that were partially mapped by memory, partially imagined, and partially revealed by careful observation. They responded to the shifting winds, changing tides, and movement of animals, learning to interpret signs that might otherwise go unnoticed. Their success depended on mindfulness, patience, and adaptability, a lesson that resonates across centuries. Exploration, whether physical, intellectual, or spiritual, requires attunement to subtle signals, quiet reflection, and the ability to harmonize effort with the rhythms of the world. The human spirit of exploration is also defined by resilience. The Vikings faced unpredictable climates, scarce resources, and unfamiliar terrain, yet they persevered. Their approach to adversity combined practical skill with observation, while their stories and sagas preserved wisdom for future generations. Each challenge became an opportunity for reflection and learning, turning hardship into subtle guidance for those who followed. Resilience, in this context, is not merely endurance. It is the cultivation of awareness, adaptability, and calm attention to the unfolding environment. Imagination and curiosity were inseparable from the Vikings' journeys. While maps and tools guided them, it was the mind's eye that brought distant shores to life. Forests, rivers, and mountains were not only physical spaces, but landscapes of imagination, shaping decisions and inspiring wonder. Curiosity motivated observation, while imagination transformed facts into meaningful narratives. This combination allowed the Vikings to approach exploration as a form of meditation, where attention to detail, reflection, and poetic awareness were as important as courage or technical skill. The lessons of Viking exploration extend beyond navigation or survival. They illuminate a broader approach to life, one that values mindfulness, patience, and harmony with both natural and human worlds. Every observation, every story, and every journey was an exercise in reflection, teaching that understanding arises from attentiveness and careful consideration. Even when facing uncertainty, the Vikings demonstrated that measured action, guided by observation and contemplation, can transform the unknown from a source of fear into an opportunity for insight and growth. Exploration is also deeply connected to legacy. The sagas, oral histories, and subtle impressions left in the land ensure that the spirit of Viking journeys persists across centuries. Their stories continue to inspire curiosity, inviting modern listeners to imagine distant shores, glacial landscapes, and the quiet rhythm of life aboard longships. Legacy is not only about physical traces, but about transmitting wisdom, values, and the contemplative mindset required to navigate challenges, both known and unseen. In this way, the human spirit of exploration transcends time, connecting past, present, and future through observation, reflection, and imaginative engagement. Moreover, the Vikings' approach reminds us that exploration is not always about conquest or immediate achievement. It is about engagement with the unknown, attentive observation, and harmonization with the environment. Their journeys were defined by respect for natural rhythms, caution in the face of uncertainty, and curiosity tempered by reflection. In contemplating their voyages, we are invited to slow our pace, attune our senses, and consider our own approach to discovery. Exploration becomes a practice of the mind, heart, and spirit, a gentle journey in which observation, reflection, and imagination guide every step. In essence, the human spirit of exploration is a balance of courage and mindfulness, curiosity and observation, action and reflection. The Vikings exemplified this balance, moving across distant seas, settling new lands, and navigating challenges with attentiveness and calm. Their legacy is not simply a record of where they traveled, but a meditation on how humans engage with the unknown. It invites us to listen to subtle signs, reflect on experiences, and imagine possibilities, cultivating a sense of wonder, patience, and quiet curiosity that remains relevant today. As we reflect on these journeys, it becomes clear that exploration is not a singular act, but a continuous process, a rhythm of movement, observation, and reflection. It is shaped by challenges and discoveries, practical knowledge and imaginative vision, survival and storytelling. The Vikings teach us that the unknown is not to be feared but approached with calm attentiveness, guided by observation, reflection, and an enduring curiosity that encourages both learning and wonder. Through their voyages, the Vikings remind us that exploration is a meditation on life itself. It is the gentle attunement to the world, the patience to observe, and the courage to act thoughtfully in uncertainty. By embracing these principles, we honor the spirit of those who ventured into distant lands, and we carry forward a quiet, reflective curiosity that bridges centuries, connecting the rhythms of past journeys to the ongoing human desire to understand, imagine, and explore. As the story of the Vikings' journeys draws to a close, we are left with a sense of vastness, of horizons that stretch beyond immediate comprehension. The seas they crossed, the lands they glimpsed, and the settlements they built are markers not just of history, but of human curiosity, courage, and reflection. Each voyage, from the fjords of Norway to the forests of Vinland, was an exploration of both the external world and the inner mind. The calm, deliberate rhythm of their movement, attentive observation, measured action, and patient reflection, offers a meditation on the enduring human desire to venture beyond the familiar, to embrace uncertainty, and to seek connection with the unknown. The oceans that carried the longships were both barrier and bridge. They separated continents, while simultaneously linking communities across unimaginable distances. Waves, winds, and currents were teachers, guiding navigation while demanding respect and attentiveness. The Vikings' intimate relationship with these natural forces illustrates a harmony between human endeavor and the environment. Their journeys were not acts of domination, but dialogues with the world, in which success depended on quiet observation, adaptability, and a reverent awareness of the vast, dynamic system surrounding them. In listening to their story, we are invited to contemplate the balance between courage and humility, action and reflection, risk and mindfulness. Even as settlements rose and fell, their influence persisted. Knowledge, stories, and memory traveled with returning sailors, weaving a network of human understanding across the North Atlantic. The sagas preserved lessons, blending practical advice with imaginative reflection, creating a bridge between generations and lands. This enduring legacy reminds us that exploration is not solely about discovery of new territories, but also about the careful cultivation of observation, reflection, and cultural continuity. The true measure of exploration lies in what is learned, remembered, and transmitted across time. The mysteries of the Viking voyages, unanswered questions about the extent of their travels, encounters with indigenous peoples, and the precise routes of distant settlements remain part of the allure. These gaps invite contemplation, imagination, and quiet curiosity. They serve as reminders that not all journeys yield complete knowledge, and that the unknown is not to be feared but embraced as a space for reflection and wonder. In this way, the Viking story mirrors the human experience itself, a continuous engagement with uncertainty, a rhythm of learning, observation, and imaginative interpretation. The longships, with their sleek hulls and sturdy design, remain symbols of this enduring curiosity. They navigated unpredictable waters, enabling humans to transcend immediate surroundings and venture into the open horizon. Yet they also embody the principle that exploration is measured, mindful, and attuned to subtle cues from the environment. Every journey across the ocean was a negotiation with uncertainty, a careful blending of skill, courage, and patient observation. These vessels, carrying both people and stories, remind us that the journey itself is as important as the destination, and that understanding emerges from experience, attentiveness, and reflection. The landscapes encountered by the Vikings, glacial coasts, dense forests, winding rivers, and distant hills remain etched in the imagination. Through sagas and oral histories, these lands become accessible to modern listeners, allowing the mind to travel across centuries and continents. Observation, imagination, and reflection merge to create a vivid tapestry of memory and possibility. By engaging with these landscapes through story, we participate in the quiet act of exploration, attuning ourselves to the rhythms of nature, the nuances of human endeavor, and the subtle lessons embedded in the environment. The human spirit of exploration, exemplified by the Vikings, extends beyond their time and place. It is a timeless quality, manifesting whenever curiosity, courage, and reflection intersect. Their journeys teach that exploration requires attentiveness, patience, and humility. It is a gentle meditation in which observation, imagination, and careful action are intertwined. The unknown is not an obstacle to conquer, but a space to approach with respect, insight, and quiet wonder. By following the rhythms established by the Vikings, watching, listening, reflecting, and imagining, we connect to a lineage of thoughtful explorers who valued experience as much as achievement. As we reflect on the Vikings' legacy, we are invited to consider our own horizons. Every journey, whether across distant lands or within the inner landscapes of thought and imagination, follows the same principles: observation, reflection, and a calm curiosity that allows us to navigate uncertainty with poise. The Vikings' voyages remind us that the act of exploration is never fully complete. There is always another shore to imagine, another current to follow, and another mystery to consider. In this quiet, meditative perspective, the horizon becomes endless, a continuous invitation to learn, wonder, and grow. Finally, the enduring power of the Vikings' story lies in its rhythm and tone. Their adventures are not merely recorded events. They are a meditation on patience, attentiveness, and the beauty of human curiosity. We are left not with final answers, but with a sense of continuity and reflection. The wind across distant shores, the gentle sway of a longship, and the whisper of a saga by firelight evoke a timeless sense of exploration. Listening to their story, we drift alongside the longships, glide through forests, and imagine distant rivers, embracing the calm, immersive experience of discovery. In closing, the Vikings' journeys are a reminder that exploration is not only about reaching new lands, but about the subtle art of observing, reflecting, and connecting with both the world and ourselves. Horizons remain endless, mysteries remain gentle companions, and the rhythm of thoughtful exploration continues to guide those willing to listen, imagine, and wonder. The story of the Vikings becomes, therefore, a meditation on human curiosity, patience, and the quiet, enduring desire to move beyond the known into the vast expanse of possibility.